The starving black widow clutches her trembling son as the auctioneer's hammer rises, condemned for stealing bread to feed her child, when suddenly the silent mountain man steps forward from the jeering crowd and declares, "I'll pay her debt." The townspeople whisper with cruel satisfaction, "Another desperate criminal getting what she deserves," they say, eyeing the ragged woman with scorn and dismissal. Her fate seems sealed. Brutal servitude, separation from her boy, with no mercy in a world built against her kind. But the weathered rancher sees something the others miss, something flickering behind her exhausted eyes that mirrors his own hidden struggles. What neither realizes is that their unlikely partnership will uncover a conspiracy that destroyed her family and threatens to consume them both. Will this mysterious rescue lead to salvation or a far more dangerous trap? The abandoned shack leaned against the prairie wind like a broken prayer. Evelyn Tildrum pressed her ear to the rotting wood, listening for footsteps. Her 8-year-old son Moses lay curled on a pile of rags, his breathing shallow and weak. 3 days without food, 2 weeks since their last proper meal. The coins she'd earned washing clothes had run out when winter stretched longer than anyone expected. Moses stirred, his dark eyes opening slowly. "Mama, my stomach hurts." Evelyn knelt beside him, smoothing his fevered brow. She'd seen this look before in other children, the hollow cheeks, the way his clothes hung loose on his shrinking frame. Time was running out. That afternoon, she walked the dusty streets of Millbrook Falls, past the general store with its locked doors, past the restaurant where she'd once begged for scraps. The smell of fresh bread drifted from Murphy's bakery, making her stomach clench with desperate hunger. She stopped outside the window. Golden loaves lined the shelves inside. Just one would keep Moses alive another week, maybe two. The baker stepped into the back room. Evelyn's hand trembled on the door handle. She'd never stolen anything in her life. Her late husband had taught her better, had taught her to read and write when most women couldn't, had shown her dignity meant more than survival, but Moses needed food more than she needed dignity. The bell chimed as she pushed inside. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She grabbed the nearest loaf and stuffed it under her shawl. The crust was still warm. "Stop right there." Sheriff Jeremiah Colt filled the doorway like a granite wall. His badge caught the afternoon light. His hand rested on his gun belt with practiced ease. "Please." Evelyn's voice cracked. "My son is sick, I'll pay you back." "That's what they all say." Colt's eyes held no warmth. "Turn around. Hands behind your back." The iron shackles bit into her wrists. The bread fell to the floor, precious crumbs scattering across the boards. Everything she'd risked, wasted. The jail cell reeked of unwashed bodies and broken dreams. Evelyn sat in the corner, Moses curled against her side. Other prisoners muttered in the darkness. Drunks, gamblers, men who'd lost everything to cards and whiskey, but none of them faced what she faced. "Mama, are you scared?" Moses whispered. Evelyn traced letters in the dirt floor with her finger. A BC the same way her husband had taught her years ago in their cabin by lamplight. Back when they owned land. Back when they had hope. "Learning is freedom," she whispered to Moses. "No matter what happens to us, they can't take what's in your mind." Moses traced the letters beside hers. His small finger followed each curve and line. Even here, even now, she could give him this gift. A shadow fell across their cell. A tall man stood watching them through the bars, weather-beaten face, eyes like winter sky. He wore rancher's clothes but carried himself different than most. Quieter, more careful. Silas Hawk had seen plenty of criminals in his 40 years. Thieves, cheats, men who'd kill for $1. But this woman didn't fit the pattern. She sat with her back straight despite the chains, teaching her boy letters like they were in a schoolhouse instead of a jail cell. Most interesting of all, she could write. He'd watched her finger trace perfect letters in the dirt. Not many women had that skill, not many men either. The next morning brought the auction. Evelyn stood on the wooden platform in the town square, Moses clinging to her skirts. The crowd gathered like buzzards around fresh meat, their faces twisted with judgment and cruel satisfaction. Mayor Duncan Bellwether stepped forward. a thin man with pale eyes that never seemed to blink. He watched Evelyn with unusual interest. Another criminal learning her place, someone called from the crowd. Should have thought of her boy before she started stealing, another voice added. Banker Cornelius Brixton adjusted his wire spectacles. Hard labor will teach her proper respect for the law. The auctioneer raised his hammer. Evelyn's future hung in the balance. Backbreaking work in some distant field. Moses sent to an orphanage where children disappeared and were never heard from again. She'd failed him. Failed everything her husband had believed about dignity and hope. The hammer started to fall. If you are enjoying this story of how one desperate act will change two lives forever, don't forget to comment where you are tuning in from to show how this story can connect us across any distances, backgrounds, and hearts. Because what will happen in the next 15 minutes in Millbrook Falls will completely change everything Evelyn thought she knew about survival and salvation. I'll pay her debt. The words cut through the crowd like a blade. Sila's hawk stepped forward, his boots echoing on the wooden platform. Conversations died. Heads turned. The auctioneer's hammer froze mid-swing. "What did you say?" Mayor Bellwether's voice carried a sharp edge. "You heard me." Silas pulled a leather pouch from his coat. Gold coins clinked against each other. "Her debt and the legal fees." "How much?" the crowd murmured like disturbed bees. Evelyn stared at the stranger who just changed her fate. She'd never seen him before, but something in his weathered face suggested he understood desperation. Banker Brixton pushed forward. "Now see here, Hawk. This woman is a criminal. She needs proper punishment. She needs proper justice." Silas counted out coins. "And justice says a debt paid is a debt settled." Sheriff Colt scratched his jaw. The law was the law, even when it didn't sit right with certain folks. Debt's $20. Court fees another $10. $30. More money than Evelyn had seen in 2 years. Silas dropped the coins into the sheriff's palm without hesitation. "This ain't right," someone called from the crowd. "She's a thief. She's paid her price." Silas turned to Evelyn. "You and the boy come with me." The ride to Ironwood Ranch stretched across rolling hills and endless sky. Evelyn sat rigid in the wagon seat, Moses pressed against her side. Fear and gratitude warred in her chest. Men didn't rescue strangers without wanting something in return. Silas guided the horses with steady hands. He'd said nothing since leaving town. The silence stretched between them like a taut rope. "Why?" the word escaped before Evelyn could stop it. Silas glanced at her. Saw something back in that jail cell, something worth saving. The ranch appeared as the sun touched the horizon. Solid buildings, good fences. Cattle dotting the pastures like scattered coins. This was wealth, real wealth. The kind Evelyn remembered from childhood before everything went wrong. "You'll work for your keep," Silas said as they approached the main house. "But the boy stays with you. Nobody separates a mother from her child on my land." That night, after Moses fell asleep on a real bed with clean sheets, Silas knocked on their door. He carried 2 cups of coffee and wore the expression of a man about to reveal a secret. "We need to talk." They sat at the kitchen table. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows on the walls. Evelyn wrapped her hands around the warm cup, savoring the luxury of real coffee. "I heard you in that jail cell," Silas said. "Teaching your boy letters, writing in the dirt." Evelyn's muscles tensed. Education made some people nervous, made them ask questions about where a woman learned such things. "My husband taught me," she said carefully. "Good man." Silas stared into his coffee. "Most folks can't read. Most folks don't need to, but some of us got problems that need solving." He stood and walked to a wooden desk in the corner. Papers covered its surface. Legal documents, contracts, letters with official seals, the business of running a successful ranch. "Built this place with my hands and my sweat," Silas said. "Started with nothing, worked 20 hours a day, made deals, shook hands. Kept my word." He picked up a contract, staring at the neat rows of text like they were enemy soldiers. "But I never learned to read." The confession hung in the air between them. Evelyn understood now. The careful way he'd handled the papers. The long pauses when people mentioned documents. The reason he'd noticed her writing in jail. Been hiding it for 15 years, Silas continued. Memorizing contracts, trusting partners, hoping nobody figured it out. He turned to face her. His eyes held the same desperation she'd felt stealing that loaf of bread. Ranch is in trouble, banks calling in loans. Contracts are getting complicated. Partners are getting greedy. He gestured at the papers. I need someone I can trust, someone who can read what they're really saying. The irony wasn't lost on Evelyn. The successful rancher needed the desperate criminal. The powerful man required help from the powerless woman. What are you asking? Partnership. Silas sat back down. You handle the papers, the correspondence, the legal matters. I handle everything else. And if I say no, then you and Moses are free to go. I'll give you money for a fresh start somewhere else. Evelyn studied his face. No deception, no hidden threats. Just a man who'd reached the end of his pride and found something more important waiting there. People in town won't like it. A criminal woman handling a respectable man's business. Let them talk. Silas's jaw tightened. I've never cared much for other people's opinions. The next morning, Moses explored the ranch with wonder. He'd never seen so much space, so much possibility. The horses fascinated him most. Great, gentle giants that responded to his tentative touches with patient kindness. Evelyn sat at the desk, examining Silas's business papers. Her educated eye caught discrepancies immediately. Payments marked as missed when receipts proved otherwise. Interest rates that seemed to change between documents. Signatures that looked slightly different from contract to contract. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Silas. She held up 2 documents. These contracts aren't just complicated. Someone's been changing them. The numbers told a story of systematic theft. Evelyn spread the documents across Silas's desk like pieces of a deadly puzzle. Payment records showed money delivered. Bank statements claimed nothing received. Interest rates jumped from 5% to 15% between identical contracts dated 1 day apart. Look at this signature. Evelyn pointed to Silas's name on a loan document. Now look at this one. Silas leaned closer. Even without reading skills, he could see the difference. One signature flowed naturally. The other looked forced. Copied, someone's been forging my name. For months, maybe years. Evelyn's finger traced across falsified dates. They're claiming you missed payments you actually made, then charging penalties on money you don't owe. The ranch ledgers revealed the scope of the deception. Cattle sales that never appeared in bank records. Property taxes paid twice because the first payment mysteriously vanished. Legal fees for disputes that shouldn't exist. Silas sank into his chair. How much? Evelyn calculated quickly. If these documents are real, you owe $40,000. If my theory's right, you actually owe less than $5,000. Difference between keeping the ranch and losing everything. Exactly. Moses burst through the kitchen door, his face flushed with excitement and fear. Mama, there's fancy men coming. Big carriage. Looks important. Through the window, they watched banker Brixton's carriage approach. Mayor Bellwether sat beside him, his pale eyes scanning the ranch buildings like a predator evaluating prey. Hide the papers. Silas's voice carried urgent command. Don't let them see what we found. Evelyn swept the documents into a wooden box and tucked it under flour sacks in the pantry. Her heart hammered against her ribs. If these men were behind the forgeries, discovering her investigation could be dangerous. Brixton entered without knocking, his wire spectacles glinting in the lamplight. Bellwether followed, carrying a leather satchel bulging with official documents. Afternoon, Hawk. Brixton's voice held false sympathy. Afraid we bring difficult news. He spread foreclosure papers across the kitchen table with theatrical precision. Red seals, legal language, the power of law weaponized against the innocent. Banks calling in your loans, all of them. Payment due in 30 days or we seize the property. Silas studied the papers he couldn't read, his face revealing nothing. Thought my account was current. Afraid not. Bellwether's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Multiple missed payments, accumulated interest, legal fees from previous disputes. Evelyn forced herself to remain silent. Every instinct screamed to challenge their lies, but revealing her knowledge would expose their investigation. "How much total?" Silas asked. $43,000. Brixton removed his spectacles and cleaned them slowly. "Substantial sum, more than most ranchers see in a lifetime." The number matched Evelyn's calculations exactly, too exactly. These men had expected this conversation, planned for it. "Course, we're reasonable men," Bellwether added. "We understand your situation, might be willing to negotiate alternative arrangements." "What kind of arrangements?" "Sell to us now for 10,000, walk away with something instead of nothing." Brixton replaced his spectacles. "Generous offer considering your circumstances. 10,000 for property worth 10 times that amount. Highway robbery dressed in legal documents. Need time to think." "Naturally." Bellwether gathered his papers. "But don't think too long. 30 days passes quickly." After they left, Evelyn retrieved the hidden documents. Her hands shook with suppressed anger. "They're stealing your ranch. Same way they've probably stolen others." "You sure?" "Certain." She showed him forged signatures, altered dates, falsified records. "This is organized crime hiding behind bank paperwork." That evening, Moses returned from the barn with disturbing news. "Heard men talking at the fence line. They said bad things about Mama, said you shouldn't trust criminals." Silas's jaw tightened. The conspiracy extended beyond documents. They were poisoning the community against Evelyn, isolating potential allies. "What exactly did they say?" "Said criminal women bring bad luck. Said ranchers who help thieves lose everything." Moses's young face creased with worry. "Are we bringing you bad luck?" "No, son. You're bringing me exactly what I need." Over the following days, Evelyn dove deeper into the ranch's financial records. The pattern emerged clearly. Other ranchers had faced similar foreclosures. The Henderson spread, the Martinez family land, the old Patterson homestead, all seized by the bank for unpaid debts, all sold immediately to unknown buyers for fraction of their value, all connected to the same forwarding address in Denver. Someone was systematically stealing the most valuable properties in the county, using forged documents and corrupt officials to make theft look legal. "We need to find the other victims," Evelyn told Silas. "If they're doing this to you, they've done it to others." Henderson family moved to California after losing their place, broke and bitter. The Martinez family, working as hired hands on land they used to own. The cruelty was breathtaking. Families destroyed, generations of work stolen, dreams crushed by men in expensive suits who rewrote reality with forged signatures. But something deeper nagged at Evelyn's memory. She'd seen these tactics before. The systematic targeting of vulnerable families, the mysterious loss of property documents, the sudden appearance of insurmountable debt. Her own family's downfall had followed the same pattern. "Silas," her voice came out barely above a whisper, "I think they killed my husband." The pieces fell into place like a completed puzzle. Her husband's sudden death in a riding accident, the immediate appearance of debt collectors, the mysterious loss of their property deed, the swift descent into poverty that had led to this moment. She hadn't been randomly selected for persecution. She'd been systematically destroyed by the same conspiracy now targeting Silas. And if they'd killed once to protect their secret, they'd kill again. The midnight oil burned as Evelyn copied documents by lamplight. Her husband's death certificate, property transfers dated suspiciously close to his accident, bank records showing debts that appeared overnight like poisonous mushrooms after rain. Every page revealed another layer of deception. Her family hadn't been unlucky victims of circumstance. They'd been murdered for their land. Silas returned from his evening rounds to find her surrounded by evidence. "What did you discover?" "They wanted our property for the railroad expansion." Evelyn held up a surveyor's map. "My husband's land sits directly on the planned route, worth a fortune to the right buyers." The map showed red lines cutting through the county like surgical incisions. Every foreclosed property lay directly in the railroad's path. Every randomly targeted family had owned valuable right-of-way land. How many families? 12 so far, maybe more. Evelyn's finger traced the red line from east to west. All lost their property the same way. Mysterious accidents, sudden deaths, quick foreclosures. Silas studied the map with growing understanding. My ranch controls the mountain pass, only practical route through the hills. Exactly. Without your land, the railroad can't connect to Denver. With it, they save millions in construction costs. The conspiracy reached beyond simple theft. This was calculated destruction of entire families to serve corporate greed. Murder disguised as business. A soft knock interrupted their investigation. Moses peeked through the doorway, his young face creased with worry. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about those men who came today. Evelyn gathered him into her arms. Even their 8-year-old son sensed the danger closing around them. We're going to fix this, she whispered, but it might get scary before it gets better. Are you scared, Mama? Yes, but being scared doesn't mean being helpless. The next morning brought visitors. 3 women in worn dresses and desperate eyes. Maria Martinez clutched a crying infant. Sarah Henderson carried a carpet bag containing everything she owned. Emma Patterson looked like she hadn't eaten in days. Heard you might help folks like us, Maria said quietly. Folks who lost everything to the bank. Silas invited them inside. Their stories matched Evelyn's suspicions exactly. Sudden accidents claiming husbands and fathers. Immediate appearance of crushing debts. Properties seized within weeks of tragedy. Bank said my husband owed money for seeds he never bought, Sarah explained. Showed me his signature on papers I'd never seen. Same here, Emma added. Claimed my pa borrowed against cattle that died in the winter storm, but he'd already sold those cattle months before. Evelyn showed them the forged documents. The women recognized the pattern immediately. Their loved ones' signatures copied imperfectly, dates altered, interest rates inflated overnight. We can prove they're stealing, Evelyn explained. But we need your testimony, your original documents, anything that shows the truth. What's the point? Sarah's voice carried bitter resignation. Who's going to believe us against the bank, against the mayor? Federal marshals will listen. If we bring enough evidence. Hope flickered in their eyes for the first time in months. The possibility of justice, of reclaiming their stolen lives. But gathering evidence meant exposing themselves to danger. If Brixton and Bellwether discovered their investigation, the consequences could be fatal. We need to be careful, Silas warned. These men have already killed to protect their secret. That afternoon, Moses returned from town with disturbing news. He'd overheard conversations at the general store, the bank manager talking to the sheriff, the mayor holding hushed conferences with unknown men in expensive suits. They're planning something, Moses reported. Heard them say your name, Papa Silas, and Mama's name too. The net was tightening. Evelyn accelerated her document copying, working through the night to preserve evidence before their enemies could act. She discovered railroad correspondence hidden in Silas's business files, letters discussing property acquisition along the mountain route, payments authorized for local consultation and problem resolution, corporate language for bribery and murder. The letters were signed by railroad executives in Denver, men with enough money and power to destroy anyone who threatened their profits. We're not just fighting local corruption, Evelyn told Silas. This reaches all the way to the territorial capital, makes it more dangerous, also makes it more important. If we stop this here, we save families across the entire territory. Word spread quietly through the county. Other victims emerged from the shadows, widows and orphans who'd lost everything, men working as hired hands on land their families had owned for generations. Each new testimony strengthened their case. Each new piece of evidence made conviction more certain, but each new witness also increased the risk of discovery. Brixton appeared at the ranch 3 days before the foreclosure deadline. His usual false politeness had vanished, replaced by barely contained threat. Heard you've been asking questions around town, talking to certain people about certain matters. Silas kept his expression neutral. Free country. Free speech. Not when that speech involves spreading lies about respected businessmen. Brixton's hand rested on his gun belt. Suggest you focus on packing instead of gossiping. After he left, Evelyn found Moses hiding in the barn. Tears streaked his young face. Heard him talking to his men outside. They said bad things would happen if we don't leave. The child's fear crystallized Evelyn's resolve. These men had already destroyed one family. They would not destroy another. We're going to fight back, she told Moses, and we're going to win. How can you be sure? Because truth is stronger than lies and we have something they don't. What's that? Each other. The town meeting was scheduled for tomorrow night. A final confrontation where truth would face lies in front of the entire community, where justice would either triumph or die forever. Evelyn spent the evening preparing their evidence, organizing documents, rehearsing her presentation, planning for every possible attack on her credibility. But in her heart, she knew this battle would not be won with papers and testimony alone. It would be won by courage, by the willingness to stand up when standing up meant risking everything. Tomorrow would determine whether a criminal woman could defeat respected men, whether truth could overcome power, whether justice existed for people like her. Tomorrow would change everything. The town hall buzzed with hostile energy, every seat filled with curious townspeople drawn by rumors of scandal and confrontation. Evelyn entered with Moses close beside her, carrying a wooden box filled with evidence. Whispers followed their path down the center aisle. There's the criminal woman. Got some nerve showing her face here. Should have stayed where she belonged. Silas walked behind them, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of judgment. The victimized families scattered throughout the crowd, their faces tense with nervous hope. Mayor Bellwether stood at the front podium like a pale spider in his web. His eyes tracked Evelyn's movement with predatory focus. Something in his expression suggested this meeting would be different than expected. "Good evening, neighbors," Bellwether's voice carried across the packed room. "We're here to address the problem of certain troublemakers spreading lies about respected members of our community." The crowd murmured agreement. They'd come expecting entertainment, a public humiliation of the uppity criminal woman who'd forgotten her place. Banker Brixton sat in the front row, his wire spectacles reflecting lamplight like insect eyes. Sheriff Colt lounged against the wall, hand resting casually on his gun belt. The power structure of Millbrook Falls aligned against one desperate woman and her allies. "Before we begin," Bellwether continued, "I have a confession to make about this woman's true identity and why she's really here." Evelyn's blood turned to ice water. The mayor's smile held venomous satisfaction. "You see, neighbors, this isn't just some random criminal who stole bread. This is Evelyn Tildrum. And Evelyn Tildrum is my dear departed brother's widow." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Moses pressed closer to his mother's side. Silas's hand moved instinctively toward his holstered revolver. "That's right," Bellwether's voice rose with theatrical emotion. "My own family, my brother Robert's wife and son. And what has she done with the grief and sympathy we offered? She's chosen to spread vicious lies about the very men who tried to help her after Robert's tragic accident." The revelation reframed everything in the crowd's mind. This wasn't just about a criminal woman anymore. This was family betrayal, personal vendetta disguised as justice. "She claims we forged documents, claims we murdered her husband, claims we're stealing land." Bellwether shook his head with practiced sorrow. "The grief has clearly driven her to madness." Evelyn stood slowly, her legs trembling with rage and recognition. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Bellwether hadn't just orchestrated her husband's death. He'd orchestrated this entire meeting to destroy her credibility before she could present evidence. "You killed him." Her voice cut through the crowd's muttering. "You killed your own brother. See how the madness speaks," Bellwether gestured to the audience. "Poor woman can't accept that accidents happen, that debts come due, that some people simply aren't meant to prosper. But Evelyn was no longer the desperate woman who'd stolen bread. She was an educated investigator with documented proof of systematic crime. She opened her wooden box and pulled out the first document. "This is your brother's original property deed," she announced, her voice carrying to the back of the hall. "Signed in 1869. No encumbrances, no debts, free and clear ownership of 200 acres. She held up a second paper. "This is the bank loan you claim he signed 3 months before his death. Notice the signature. Notice how the letter R in Robert looks different, how the T in Tildrum slopes the wrong direction." Murmurs of uncertainty rippled through the crowd. Bellwether's confidence flickered. Grief makes people see things that aren't there. "Then explain this." Evelyn produced the surveyor's map showing railroad routes. "Every foreclosed property sits directly on the planned railroad line. Every murdered husband owned land worth fortunes to the Denver Corporation." She spread documents across a nearby table, bank correspondence, forged contracts, payment records that proved systematic theft. Henderson, Martinez, Patterson, 12 families destroyed by the same pattern, mysterious accidents followed by impossible debts followed by immediate foreclosure. The victimized families began standing throughout the crowd. Sarah Henderson, Maria Martinez, Emma Patterson, others whose names had been forgotten by a community that preferred comfortable lies to uncomfortable truth. "We all lost husbands," Sarah called out. "All lost land the same way. All showed identical forged documents." Bellwether's pale face flushed red. "These women are desperate. They'll say anything to avoid responsibility for their situations." "Will they forge railroad correspondence?" Evelyn held up letters between Brixton and Denver executives. "Will they fake bank records showing payments for local problem resolution?" She read aloud from corporate documents. "Payments authorized for property acquisition along the mountain route. Bonuses promised for eliminating obstacles to railroad development." "Your brother was an obstacle," she said, facing Bellwether directly. "We all were, so you eliminated us." The crowd's mood shifted like wind before a storm. Doubt crept into faces that had shown only judgment moments before. The evidence was too detailed, too systematic, too damning to dismiss as grief-driven fantasy. Bellwether abandoned his grief-stricken brother act. His voice turned cold and sharp. "You have no proof I killed anyone, no witnesses, no evidence. I have this." Evelyn produced a final document, her husband's life insurance policy. Robert increased his coverage 2 weeks before his death. Guess who convinced him it was necessary? Guess who witnessed the application? The policy bore Bellwether's signature as witness. The date proved he'd known about his brother's planned death in advance. "Insurance companies investigate suspicious claims," Evelyn continued. "They found evidence Robert's accident was staged. His horse was drugged. The cliff trail was sabotaged. They refused payment because it was clearly murder." The town hall fell dead silent. Even Bellwether's allies looked shaken by the methodical presentation of evidence. But Evelyn wasn't finished. "The insurance investigators' report names you as the primary suspect. It's been sitting in Denver for 2 years waiting for local law enforcement to act." She turned to address the entire crowd. "Sheriff Colt knew. Mayor Bellwether knew. Banker Brixton knew. They've all been part of this conspiracy from the beginning." The sound of boots on wooden steps echoed through the hall. Federal marshals entered through the back doors, led by a tall man with a silver badge. Silas had sent his secret correspondence after all. "Duncan Bellwether," the lead marshal announced. "Cornelius Brixton, you're under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and murder." The crowd erupted in chaos as the truth finally came to light. The iron shackles clicked around Bellwether's wrists with satisfying finality. His pale face had turned ashen gray as the federal marshals read the charges. Conspiracy to commit murder, systematic fraud, theft of federal land designated for homestead development. Banker Brixton tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Marshal Davidson tackled him to the floor. His wire spectacles scattered across the wooden boards, reflecting lamplight like broken stars. "Cornelius Brixton," Davidson announced, hauling the banker to his feet. "You're charged with document forgery, conspiracy, and accessory to murder in 12 separate cases." The crowd watched in stunned silence as their respected leaders were dragged away in chains. Everything they'd believed about justice and authority crumbled in the span of minutes. Sheriff Colt attempted to slip toward the back exit. Marshal Thompson blocked his path with casual authority. "Going somewhere, Sheriff. We have questions about your role in covering up multiple homicides." Within an hour, the entire corrupt network was in custody. The railroad executives would be arrested in Denver by morning. The conspiracy that had destroyed so many families finally faced justice. Evelyn stood in the emptying town hall, clutching Moses close. 2 years of poverty and desperation had led to this moment. Truth had prevailed over power. Evidence had defeated corruption. "Is it really over?" Moses whispered. "The dangerous part is—" Evelyn smoothed his hair. "Now comes the hard part, building something better." The legal proceedings moved swiftly. Federal courts took conspiracy cases seriously, especially when they involved railroad corruption and systematic murder. Bellwether's confession came within days, hoping to avoid the hangman's noose. He'd orchestrated his brother's death for the insurance money and valuable land. The railroad had promised enormous payments for clearing the mountain pass route. Greed had transformed family loyalty into calculated murder. Brixton revealed the full scope of the document forgery operation. Signature samples stolen from legitimate contracts, dates altered with chemical solutions, false debts created through careful manipulation of banking records. The victimized families began reclaiming their stolen properties. Sarah Henderson returned to her ranch with enough compensation to rebuild completely. Maria Martinez discovered her husband's life insurance policy, providing security for her children's future. Emma Patterson learned her father's land contained valuable mineral deposits. The railroad had known about silver veins running through the mountain pass. Her family's poverty had been manufactured to steal potential fortunes. Evelyn inherited more than her original property. The insurance investigation had documented her husband's assets extensively: hidden accounts, business partnerships, investments that had been systematically stolen after his death. "You're wealthy," Silas said, reviewing the inheritance documents. "Wealthier than most people in the territory. Money feels different when you've been hungry." Evelyn studied the papers that represented security beyond her wildest dreams. "It's not about having enough anymore. It's about making sure others have enough too." The idea came naturally. Transform the restored property into something beneficial for the entire community, a place where education could flourish, where children like Moses could learn regardless of their family's circumstances. The Tildrum Hawk Educational Ranch opened 6 months after the trials concluded. Evelyn taught reading and writing. Silas, now literate thanks to patient instruction, handled practical skills like farming and animal husbandry. Children arrived from across the county, some from prosperous families seeking quality education, others from struggling homesteads where books were luxury items. All learned together regardless of background or circumstances. Moses thrived in the diverse environment. His natural intelligence blossomed under proper instruction. His talent with horses made him a favorite among younger students who needed patient guidance. The first graduation ceremony brought tears to Evelyn's eyes. 12 students received certificates proving their literacy and numerical skills. Children who might have remained uneducated now possessed tools for building better futures. "Mama, look!" Moses pointed to the audience. Sarah Henderson sat with her rebuilt family. Maria Martinez beamed as her eldest daughter received top honors. Emma Patterson had traveled from her silver mine to watch former neighbors' children succeed. The transformation extended beyond individual families. Millbrook Falls evolved from a corrupt company town into a thriving educational community. New businesses arrived to serve ranch families. A proper library opened with books donated from across the territory. The railroad eventually built through the mountain pass, but fairly. Property owners received honest compensation. Workers found stable employment. Progress happened without destroying lives. Evelyn stood in her classroom one autumn afternoon, watching students practice their letters. The same letters she'd traced in jail cell dirt now filled proper slates and paper. Education had become her weapon against ignorance and injustice. Silas entered carrying the day's mail. His reading had progressed to handling complex correspondence independently. Partnership had evolved into something deeper than business necessity. "Letter from the territorial governor," he announced, "wants to discuss expanding the educational program statewide. Think we're ready for that challenge. Think we're ready for any challenge." Together, Moses burst through the door with characteristic energy. Now 10 years old and tall for his age, he carried himself with confidence that came from security and education. "Mama, the new students are here. Family from back east. Children don't know how to ride horses or rope cattle. Then you'll teach them, same way others taught you." "Yes, ma'am." The cycle continued. Knowledge passed from teacher to teacher again. Each generation building on the foundation laid by those who'd fought for justice and education. Evening brought quiet reflection. Evelyn sat on the ranch porch, watching sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. 2 years ago she'd stolen bread to save her son's life. Tonight, she was reshaping an entire community's future. The transformation hadn't happened through revenge or violence. It had happened through dignity, intelligence, and unwavering commitment to truth. The weapons of the educated, wielded by someone the world had underestimated. Moses joined her on the porch, now carrying books instead of hunger. "What are you thinking about, Mama? How far we've traveled, how much farther we can go. Where to next?" Evelyn smiled, watching stars appear in the darkening sky. "Wherever people need teachers, wherever children need hope, wherever justice needs defenders." The starving widow who'd once stood on an auction block now commanded respect across the territory. The criminal woman had become a pillar of her community. The desperate mother had transformed desperation into lasting change. Education had set them free. And freedom, once achieved, demanded sharing with others who still wore chains of ignorance and injustice. The work continued.